The first thing that I'd like to demonstrate in this workshop is designing a report against multiple data sources such as a historian and an alarm database, and then triggering that report to update automatically based on signals in the PLC. So I'm going to start with a pre-built template layout using the template library. And this layout is going to allow us to collect batch data from the historian based on triggers in the PLC that determine the start and end of the report time. So we'll call this one batch cycle report. We'll use the PLC connector for the event triggers and the historian connector for the data. And in this one, we get to pick 4 different KPIs by default that we want to include in the report. So I'll just basically line this up with the KPIs from my mixer machine. And when I click Finish, XLReporter is going to launch the schedule designer so I can fill out the triggers that are going to update the report automatically. So if you notice, there's basically 2 different events that this template is monitoring, a start event and an end event. The start event tag transitioning to 1 and the start event tag transitioning to 0. And in those 2 conditions, there's going to be 4 different actions that have to be processed. One of them is the capture of the cycle ID from the PLC. And this is going to react to the start event tag transitioning to a value of 1. And when that happens, it's going to capture a tag value that represents the ID of the cycle. And for that, we want to use this cycle ID tag. And then again, on the same condition, on the cycle start, we're also going to capture the date and time that that event has happened into an XLReporter date time variable. Then when the cycle ends, on cycle start in my case equals 0, we're going to capture the date and time of the end of the cycle. And then finally, once we have that information, the ID of the cycle, when it started and when it ended, the report will be updated on the end event as well. So now I'll save the schedule, and before we go in and run one of these, I'm just going to go in and take a look at that template so we can see how it's put together. And when I double-click the template there in the Project Explorer, you can see that the Template Studio launches. And this is a very Excel-like environment, but it's actually a standalone application included with XLReporter. If you preferred, you could also run this design environment as an Excel add-in. Now, the template in XLReporter has essentially 4 different components that represent the configuration. The first one is the workbook or worksheet layout, which has been done automatically for us using the pre-built template library layout. But if you look at how this template is put together, basically there's a header area that's going to have the cycle ID, the start, the end, and the duration. And then there's going to be an area where the KPIs are trended. This area will actually expand as rows are collected from the historian. And then there's some summary formulas below the data area, which will actually expand as well as the data is inserted, so that we get column summaries of each of the tags included in the report. This is all standard workbook or Excel functionality, formatting and formulas and whatnot. And so this can actually be customized at this point as well. But just for the sake of simplicity in the workshop, I'm going to leave the layout basically default for now. Now, the second piece of the template configuration is the data connections. And the connections represent a mapping of variables and historian data to locations in the workbook. So you can see here that that variable that was being captured for the cycle ID on the schedule, that's going to go into cell C3 here in the template sheet. Same thing with the start and end times. They're going to go below that. And then the historian data containing the min, max, and average of the 4 tags we selected is going to be inserted into row 10 here, which is going to expand this area of the worksheet and cause the ranges of all these summary formulas to stretch when that data is inserted. And that's important because for a batch or a cycle report, it's not necessarily going to be the same time duration each time the cycle is executed, and therefore you might have a variable number of rows being inserted when that happens. That's why the insert placement is used, so that any workbook features that we have configured, like formulas and charts, will be stretched automatically. The next piece of the template configuration is the naming convention. So when the report is updated automatically by the PLC event triggers, we need to have a definition of what the files are going to be named. So if we open up report names here, we can see that by default this template is configured to create a sheet named after the current cycle ID inside of a workbook which is named after the date. Now, for CFR compliant applications, we would want each report file individually to be signed. So what we'll do is remove the variable name from the sheet and actually add it on to the book name so that each cycle gets its own report file that can be signed and approved and published. The final piece of the configuration is the schedule, which we've already looked at as the library wizard brought it up for us. But this schedule basically takes all the configuration that you've done in the template and animates it and sets it into motion automatically based on these PLC triggers. So now, just to see how this will work in practice, let's simulate a cycle by using the test function here in the schedule designer. So let's say my cycle start event occurred today at 6:32 in the morning. So we'll capture the value in that cycle ID tag from the PLC. And we'll do the same thing for the start time of the cycle. And we'll say it lasted around 3 hours. We'll capture the end time at that point. So it runs roughly from 6:30 to 9:30. And then at that point in time, the report would be updated as well. And again, normally this would be happening automatically based on the values transitioning in the PLC. Just for the sake of the workshop, I'm going to step through it manually using the test function. But at this point, we should have a finished report in the output. So we have a 2020 folder here in our output. We've got an 820 file with the cycle ID, which right now is P1212_X. Inside of that file, we've got all of the batch information captured up in the header. The historian data has been inserted in that area of the template where it was connected. And then the formulas have been stretched to summarize that exact range. So now in the next segment, we'll come back and we'll show you how you can make some modifications to this template, including adding things like a trend chart and then adding an additional sheet to capture alarm and event data.